It's a constant failing on my part to not like end that soon enough. And the harm that like you are not aware is being caused elsewhere in the team is almost inevitably more significant than you're giving it credit for. And so I think the biggest challenge I've always had is like the second bad behavior starts to materialize. Number one, like correct it. If they don't accept the correction, that's pretty much the end of the relationship.
There's a moment Sam Witherspoon can't shake. He's sitting in a boardroom with his co-founders, and they've been selling divorces online for a year and a half. See, he started as a lawyer. The business was working and money was coming in, but Sam was miserable. I was ashamed to tell people what I did for a living, he told me. No mission, no purpose, just transactions. So in that boardroom, co-founders looked at each other across the table and asked a very dangerous question. What if we burned it all down and started over? Here's what makes Sam's story worth your next hour. That moment of walking away from a working business was just the beginning. Because the thing he chose to build next, a defense intelligence platform called Anvil, put him directly in the crosshairs of the largest American defense contractors on Earth. Whether it be Palantir, Lockheed, right? These companies with thousands of employees and billions in government contracts. Sam had about 30 people and a belief that the entire defense establishment here in Canada was still solving problems the way a 1990s law firm did. Bankers, box full of paper that no one could search. Perhaps Excel sheets that were still outdated. And someone once told him, nah, no one ever makes the transition from services to product. And selling into government? Jeez. Well, his response? Watch me. Today, Anvil's software runs on active military operations. Their unofficial company patch, a cockroach. The motto underneath, hard to kill. They're official partners with many of the Canadian Armed Forces agencies. And this conversation is about what it takes to outlast giants. Why sometimes the only way forward is to stop playing their game entirely. Sam, welcome to our David versus Goliath podcast. I'm excited to have this story. I'm excited this story because it's a homegrown story here in Ottawa. I'm excited because Sam, you and I have done some work together and we've become some good friends over the last little while. So I feel like I've got a backdoor insight to some of the crazy shit that you've had to actually try and do as an entrepreneur. And I'm excited to tell your story in both this book that we're writing and in this podcast, because I truly believe it as one of the perfect cases of a David versus Goliath, a small little Ottawa team of engineers and hackers who are trying to figure their way in this defense industry, you know, go through this crazy journey of professional services to productization, different team members and different people who are coming to it. So Sam, tell me where this starts for you in terms of how you got into this space, into the defense space, into data analytics and software.
Yeah, you sort of keyed in on it, which is I've been wrong a lot. And I think what's drawn me back into this industry is the sort of like mission and purpose component of it. So about 12 years ago, I clerked at the federal court. And while I was there, I experienced, sort of firsthand the challenges of, fragmented data ecosystems. In their circumstance, it was frankly, huge piles and piles of bankers' boxes full of paper. And the bigger the case, the more complex the case, basically the more paper you were forced to sift through. When it's paper, there's no control F. There's no way to sort of speed through that process in any way. And so you end up wasting a ton of time with those paper copies. So the original premise when I left my clerkship, completed my articling position at the court, joined practice was, is there an opportunity to start something to solve that problem? And so tried that for about a year. Sort of realized pretty quickly that the government of Canada does not work with people with great ideas all the time. And so we looked around and said like, well, where could we sort of inject ourselves in that process, sort of front run the court and take over a huge volume off of their plate and then use that as the bargaining chip, as the sort of like negotiating point to inject ourselves into solving that problem for them. And so family law was a very logical logical point of entry. There's a huge amount of family law cases every year. The court is involved in many of them, unfortunately. And there's a population of desperate individuals who can't afford a lawyer in that circumstance. So we worked away at that for maybe like a year and a half. And in the course of doing that, I'll be like brutally honest, I did not like the work I was doing. I was ashamed to tell people about what I did.
You're selling. What was the line? You were selling divorces online.
Yeah,
That
I was
was
singing divorces online. Yeah, it was not good. It felt purposeless to me. It was, there wasn't a mission behind it.
But the key insight that drove it was, can I control F this box of paper?
Yeah.
That-
How can I get through like huge volumes of information quickly?
Yeah.
And more effectively or efficiently than I previously was. And so, to do that, we sort of
And that's interesting because that insight, you had to be in the industry because you would assume like, well, I can control F my own files, right? Like as a individual or like, but I guess you're looking at legal systems, governments, you're looking at more archaic data management that has not evolved.
Yeah, and I think the other challenge that, any large organization has, it's not just the government of Canada, it's any large organization, is that at that size and scale, change is very complicated and very cumbersome. And so, the sort of tyranny of the status quo for them is always present. It's like, well, it's, this is how we've always done it. It's easier this way. We know how this system works. I remember one of the first weeks I was at the court, I was introduced to the court scheduler, and I walked into her office, and she had a giant drafting board, and, there were 30-something judges at the time on the federal court. Each one had a line. She had a giant ruler, and she managed the entire court schedule in her weird little, like, paper format with, like, special codes so that she could remember what was what. But, like, if she got hit by a bus tomorrow, like, the court schedule would come crashing down. I remember thinking to myself, like, yo, there's calendar apps. Like, there's things that have solved this. Is
Already solved. This is a solved problem.
like, yeah, but she'd been doing it this way for 30 years. She was really good at it. Like, there was never an issue. And so, like, why ruin a good thing in that circumstance was the sort of prevailing attitude.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's retired and like the system has evolved since then. Maybe not.
It's so interesting because that is one of the themes that we constantly see where the Davids have opportunities to disrupt. It's these sort of industries, this space where it's like, that's always worked. But the problem itself is sort of already solved somewhere else, but it just hasn't been applied here. That's, I think, maybe that key insight for you initially as you start this. And I think there's a, false myth sometimes where we talk about entrepreneurs and they come up with they start their business with this huge vision idea of how they're going to change the world. And I love how simple you're like, no, we're trying to control F these files. Like it's like such a simple insight. I just know there's a better way of doing this, and I'm going to try and find a way in. And I'm gonna find a way in through family law. That's it.
Yeah.
Now you do family law for a little bit. You hate it for a year and a half.
Yeah, got investigated by the Law Society for unauthorized practice of law, and sort of what I
found guilty.
no. I mean, there's no guilt or innocence in those. It is it's regulatory. But what I sort of learned from that experience was, if I don't actually care about what I'm doing, like underlying the work that I'm doing, I'm not going to persevere through it. I'm not going to persist when it gets hard or challenging. And so I didn't care about the purpose. I didn't care about the mission. To be blunt, like I didn't care about the people getting divorced. It was a means to another end for me. And, it wasn't worth persisting at. And so I remember the office we were in. I remember the people we were talking about it with. We sort of sat around a boardroom table one day and we're like, none of us like this. We don't want to keep doing this, but we've got cash in the bank. Like, what could we do with this? That's where like the initial pivot started.
Yeah. And what was the first project that you got in the pivot?
So I think the first project we did was actually for a furniture company called Steelcase in Michigan. And what we ended up doing was building the meeting transcription software. So we knew there was opportunity at the time in machine learning. And so, yeah, we identified, the transcription opportunity was a pretty significant one.
That's hilarious because now it's
Yeah.
It's every software, ClickUp has it now, and Notion has it, Google has it. Everyone's got this meeting transcription AI, right?
Yeah.
So that's cool. So you start on this pivot towards sort of machine learning professional services projects, and you're sort of just picking up projects where you can.
Yeah. We said like we don't have a great product idea right now, but we have, an opportunity to build a business and services, and we'll figure things out there. I think we had identified specific industries we wanted to work in, but we also recognized to penetrate them, you need some sort of customer. Like you can't show up as customer zero or have them be, your first customer. And so it was, we had a bit of a destination in mind, but eventually we ended up getting there.
Yeah. So walk me through some of those stages. What were some of the early customers? What have they evolved in? When was the moment for you where you're like, okay, we're in the industry we sort of want to play in, and now we've got something here that feels like it's got some legs.
Yeah, so the sort of stages we went through, we knew we wanted to work in Canada. And so one of our earliest projects outside of what I mentioned with Steelcase was we did a bunch of work for the Public Health Agency of Canada. This is well pre-pandemic. Ironically, we worked on vaccine screening and the National Advisory Council on Immunization, basically like the immunization approval process. So automating information extraction and assessing, the efficacy of vaccines. So building them systems to manage that information flow. Huge amounts of, open source research is available. How do you harvest all of that information to help them make a recommendation as the council on, is this a safe, effective vaccine? So we did that. That project got chopped after the first phase due to lack of funding. Uh, I
Ironic,
can't
eh?
even make this stuff. The second one was actually open source disease monitoring, and this is probably like 2016.
So how do you you take on these projects? I'm just curious. Like you don't have any experience in vaccine or open disease monitoring. So what's your playbook? What's your thought on this? Like, okay, we'll bid for the contract and find a bunch of people who can model this out. Like,
Yeah, so at the time, these were coming out as challenges under a program called the Built in Canada Innovation
yes,
Program, BCIP.
yeah,
And so you didn't have to have any experience. You just had to like put your hand up and say you could do it and like prove, through credentials or whatever that there was a chance you could. So we were successful in two of those. And then from there, we actually were able to use that as a springboard to deliver a capability for U.S. Special Operations Command in the States. And that was a big deal for us at the time because it was the first sort of, defense-focused project, but it was also us, really leveling up who we were delivering for and the sort of complexity and duration of the project. And so from there, we were able to use that contract to come back and begin working for the Canadian Armed Forces. So that was probably 2017 is when
yeah.
that really got serious for
Yeah,
us.
yeah. And that was exciting times because it's a pretty big professional services deal. You build up the team to be able to actually accomplish it, to work through it. And how are you at this point funding the whole operation? So is it how are you getting the team together to make this happen?
I mean, that was a lot of the contracts were milestone based. So, we knew what we could earn, but we were running, as lean as possible. Sometimes my co-founder Bennett and I were not taking a salary for a while to be able to make payroll for other folks. So, we were doing it sort of in the semi old fashioned way of like grit and determination.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think one of the themes of your story as I think through is survive long enough that you can just get the next thing, right? It's this scrappy adaptability, can we just get through this next year? Because I know there's another thing, there's another milestone. So you take on these kind of pretty large contracts within US Special Operations. You're working to deliver them. You hit some milestones, you unlock the next pieces. What's going well at this point, and where do the obstacles start to show up in this professional service business that you built?
Yeah. So I mean, I think first and foremost, my spirit animal is the cockroach. We've made, so like later on in the story, we'll get to it, but we've made sort of like unofficial mission patches, which there's a few other startup founders in the defense space who now have them.
And you have a cockroach on it?
Yeah, it's a cockroach, and it says hard to kill, and like the objective for many companies in this space at this point should be to be hard to kill as a company. It takes a lot of like persistence and resilience to survive in this industry. So like you don't get to make these big splashy announcements. It is like a slow incremental compounding grind.
I think that's so interesting because again, it's not about winning. It's about just not losing long enough.
Yeah.
Like if I don't lose long enough, I can compound little things that just break through in this machine that we're trying to enter and help improve. I was taking us back to your professional services moments here, which is like, okay, so you get some big contracts, some things are going well, you're finally getting in some money, you're getting more narrowed on defense, you still got some other projects. What is working at this point and what is not? What is still extremely like challenging as you're building this business?
Yeah, so I think professional service businesses are very addictive. You get to have like continuous sort of incremental success if you're good at it, and we are good at it. Like we're good at our jobs. That's something I've been very fortunate. I have lots of people around me who are good at their jobs, but it's very addictive because the customer is going like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you solved this problem for us." And you're going like, "Yeah, it's me.
On the
Did it. I did it." And I'm sure lots of other people could have solved the exact same problem for them. We just got the chance, right? But I think that, the challenge that professional services presents is like you kind of hop onto a treadmill, and every time you bring on a new person to bring on additional capacity, the treadmill speeds up. And like there's never really a time where the treadmill slows down or like, you don't feel like you have to run a bit faster the next year to continue to grow and sustain your business. And so what we started experiencing was two main problems. The first is the customer has these like episodic contracting mechanisms. So you'd show up, you'd work, you'd deliver a solution for 6 months, whatever, and then they wouldn't have had a sustainment plan beyond that 6 months. So the contract would drop off. And the way most of the traditional like services firms have solved that is everyone is an independent contractor. So like you don't have a contract, you don't eat, you don't get paid. We only have employees. We don't do the independent contractor thing. And so it was a very different mindset that we went in with. And I think it's why we were able to deliver such outsized results for a team at the time of our size, like 14 people probably. And I think that as we started to experience these like up and downs, we became sort of like Keynesian economists. We would save in the good times and then we'd spend it to sustain in the sort of like lean times. And what it meant was like we kind of hit like a steady state at that size where if we didn't find a way to endure beyond that or like grow beyond that, we were just going to continue to operate at about that size. I think the other thing that we saw was, much like my experience at the federal court, much of the business that we were working in for the Canadian Armed Forces was extremely analog. It was extremely like it's not paper driven, but they'd taken that paper process and replicated it with like Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. Are now users, but at the time the customers, employees were not particularly efficient at doing the work they had to do. And so the way they solved it was just working harder and like, burning people out. And so the challenge that we saw became like the opportunity, the point of entry for like, hey, there is a software solution for this. And I think that, when we finally sort of flipped that switch and we're like, we are a software business now, I'd be lying if I said we looked around and said like, are there competitors? We had no idea who else even made solutions like that. And I think to a degree to this day, like we only know who our competitors are now because like people compare us to them as opposed to us like actively going out and seeking them out. Yeah, it's been weird that we've never really, done the market scan to assess that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's just sort of focused on you sort of focus on the immediate problem your customer had, the immediate next problem. You sort of identify it. But how did what when you sort of you come to this insight around the fact that within Canadian defense and analysts are still very analog. That's because you're in there with
Yep.
them, right?
Yeah.
You're getting contracted as professional services to help solve key problems, and you're in there and you're watching them work, and you're like, this.
Yeah, this is bananas. Yeah.
And so the professional services sort of was your Trojan horse. It
Yeah.
got you in there. You sold them what they already knew they could buy because they're used to buying and contracting. You get in there to try and help them, and you realize, oh my God, you don't even have the tools for me to help you. Like you're now you're causing me more work because even trying to just help you is challenging. There's probably a number of insights that you come to during that professional services period. I mean, one, you sort of identified that whole feast and famine challenge of these contracts, especially for public service,
Yeah.
right? Or these massive contracts. If it was a lot of small contracts, you could sort of you get less maybe of a feast and famine, but these massive contracts with that sort of fall off, and then you've got these employees who are sitting there and nothing to do,
Yeah.
no work to do. Law firms or consulting firms sort of solve that with a lot of like little mini projects that they've got going on. What insights drive you to go, we need to be product, we need to be software. This is so a bit of the analog, a bit of the challenge of the professional services. I remember us doing an offsite, and I remember us a couple things. One, it was like, okay, we've been doing professional services for just anyone and everyone. We've been
Yeah.
mercenaries. We actually were.
We were,
You
yeah.
had Canadian Tire. You had all of these sort of things, and then it was a moment of like, okay, we can't be anymore.
Yeah.
And actually became one of your values that we're not mercenaries.
Yeah.
We are gonna choose an area we want to have impact. So I remember us doing a very powerful values exercise at the time. And some values exercises can be complete bullshit. Like,
Yeah.
we've all done them. We've all been part of companies that do them that doesn't go anywhere. But I felt that one was powerful because it was a decision making. It was a narrowing of like, because you had to let go of well-paying clients.
Yeah, you had to say no. Yeah.
Like, that I think is, like, that's the how did that feel? Take me to that one. Like, how do you say no to well-paying clients who are feeding your payroll at this
Yeah.
time? And how does your co-founder, Bennett, the CFO, go, "Okay, I'm gonna say no to cash coming in"?
It's a good question. So I remember there were a couple things. One was we'd already been talking about building a product to solve like some of the problems we'd experienced. And I have this memory and I can't remember who told it to me, but the comment was like, no one ever makes the transition from services to product. I'm not saying we're there yet, but like no one ever makes the transition. And I was like, yeah, fucking watch me.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that. But I didn't just set out to prove some random person who I don't even remember now wrong. I think that the way we did it was Bennett was equally frustrated with like constantly having to manage those like cyclical waves. And we all agreed that like we are better off to fucking burn the boats and go all in on this than to continue to endure that like cyclical drama and the sort of, the honestly that like uncomfortable feeling in your stomach that like, do I know 6 months from now that another contract will materialize, or do I need to let these people go today? And so we were all kind of tired of that constant like base rate anxiety over that. And so I think it was an easier decision to turn away like well-paying clients than you might imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it almost came to a point where, like, I don't wanna run this business.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it wasn't even, yeah, it was
We're
like,
back to the like, it's not,
yeah, if it's
why am I doing this?
Yeah.
I don't care about the things I'm doing for the most part. Like
Yeah. I remember so we do the values exercise, we get narrow on who you want to serve.
Mhm.
And this is when that sort of blurry vision that you had earlier on starts to crystallize more and more, right? Like, we clearly want to serve the defense industry, and you get more narrow on that. So what is it today? Who do you serve today? What's the
Yeah, so I think our primary focus remains supporting the Canadian Armed Forces, Department of National Defense, Canadian Armed Forces. It is, deeply important to me that Canada has the tools and the equipment required to actually be effective in a modern fight. And I think that, it's been a long time where we haven't really invested the time and attention in that. Successive political parties have, reduced funding to the Department of National Defense, Canadian Armed Forces. And so, for the first time in a while, I'm optimistic that change is coming, but I think that fundamentally what we are doing is very, very similar to where we started like 12 years ago. It's like we got to make things more accessible, easier, and more available to more people. Like
It's
that
still the control F of the
still control F. Like it sounds so silly, but it is still control F.
because there's massive amounts of data.
Yeah.
It's
Still fragmented.
Yeah.
It lives all over the place. Yeah, it's truly still a problem. And I think it's not unique to D&D CAF, but like every big organization has the same problem. The number of times, I'm sure even in your organization, like the number of times you're like, where is this document? It's like, why are we still asking that question? That is the problem here.
Yeah. You had this insight that you could build software around this, but your own team struggled with that insight initially. And it's taken a while to build software around it. So from that moment till you had and software that you could deploy, how long was that?
It's got to be 2020. Yeah. With US SOCOM, we had built some infrastructure behind the scenes just to enable the massive amounts of audio recordings that we were receiving, and to manage the different machine learning models we were training and deploying onto devices. So like the first nugget was already there. From that, but like we've never used that code base since. So like I don't want to leave you with the impression, but like we built something.
But you built an internal competency.
Yeah, but we started to understand, there was some efficiency to be gained there. Then working with D&D CAF, we were able to pretty quickly get a working prototype live. Was it amazing? Like, hell no. It solved a very specific problem for them. And we ended up actually deploying that on an operation in 2021. And so that would be the sort of like horizon of like 2020, we're having that argument.
Yeah.
2021, we have like a minimally viable product.
Yeah.
That is now operationally deployed and offered, I think an extremely high amount of value to the customer on that.
Yeah, that's a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't
But
have a lot of money to do it.
No. You then go through changing this team.
Yeah.
From a professional services team to a product software team. There's some pain around that change management there. How was that process like?
Yeah. I mean, the thing you optimize for in a services organization is not the thing you optimize for in a product organization. And so in a services organization, you need the most tolerable consultant you can possibly put in front of the customer for the lowest dollar amount you can possibly find them at.
Yeah.
I had a friend who ran like, they're called like body shops in the industry, but basically they like are the staffing companies for the government of Canada. And his expression was always, my business is selling B- consultants to C- customers. And like, it kind of is reflective of what that system, optimizes for is you want the cheapest tolerable consultant you can deploy. That team is not a team that can build a product.
No.
That team is a team that can go in and, keep the customer happy-ish. And so the shift there was either upskilling those people, and we did do some of that, or, finding off-ramps for those people to land somewhere else where that skill set is still valued, because there are still lots of body shops in Ottawa where that skill set is valued, though, that they can, continue having a successful, productive career, just not with us.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had to overhaul quite half the team almost.
Yeah, maybe a little more than that.
Yeah.
Pretty significant churn through that period for sure.
Yeah.
And
And I mean, that's interesting because as when you're building the team, you're able to off-ramp and overhaul team members, but you as the leader and Bennett as the founder, as co-founders, there's no off-ramping you guys. You guys have to change. You guys have to adapt. Your skill set has to evolve. There's a few moments of your skill having to evolve, right? There's like the early moments of this being, a family law sort of, then the early moments of just like getting a bunch of contracts, Then you sort of hone in on defense contracts, professional services there, for Government of Canada, and then going over to product. Your skill, your leadership, your ability to bring a team together has to constantly evolve and change. Look back at Sam from 5 years ago, 8 years ago. How have you changed? And then what has stayed the same? What are those characteristics that you're like, you know what, I'm still I'm still this way, and I'm thankful for it because it's allowed me to get through some challenges. Or yeah, here's parts of me that had to mellow, or I had to figure these skills out.
I can turn this around on you and say, like, Claude, what have you observed change? Because I think we've worked together long enough that you
Yes.
probably have some answers, and
Yes.
then I can build on that. So, like, what have you seen change?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. So the one that comes to mind, there's the immediate one that comes to mind. Sam's a fiery spirit. Like there's a fire to you. And I think that it's not that I've seen the fire mellow out, it's that I've seen you point the fire elsewhere. I think that in periods of professional services, and I see this in myself, because, like, again, a professional service business is this feast and famine, that when we're in the famine period, that fireness turns inward sometimes on our own teams, right? Like, we're frustrated. Why aren't you doing this? I'm always the one having to do this. There's this real, but it's a flaw in the system and not completely a flaw in our people. It's just the way we've designed the business. When now I've sort of seen you turn that fire outward towards the Goliaths or the industry, and so using that fireness, that energy, that brilliance towards speaking up, advocating, and moving things at a systems level versus sometimes internally. So that's where I see like a shift from like being inside the house to outside the house. And that happens because I think you built a strong executive leadership team that's taking care of the house now more than
Yeah.
more than before. So there's something I've seen.
Yeah. I think fair. I definitely am fortunate to be in a bit better of a position to advocate more broadly for what has been historically a very challenging industry to operate in as a newcomer. I think from my perspective, what's changed is like the problems that I'm now having to solve have changed.
Mm,
And so that's forced me to develop new skills. I remember in high school I had a deathly fear of public speaking, and like, yeah,
look at you now.
look at me now. Now I will willingly go and sit on a panel on stage. I think one of the other ones that still I personally recognize in myself, and maybe that's the other thing that's changed, is I am much better at sort of like introspecting on what's
Mm,
consuming my energy. But part of the role of a CEO is to be like out advocating for your company, and that means attending events. I've had to start to develop those skills and figure out how to navigate like uncomfortable social settings for myself.
yeah.
And so, how has that changed? Well, like, I took my wife to one of those events a few days ago, and she's like, I didn't recognize like the person that was like walking around the room talking to people, and like I've had to develop that as a skill because it's not something that I was, unlike you, innately born with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love to see that. I think the other piece is you've gained further conviction in some of your intuition. I would say a younger Sam had less conviction in those contrarian opinions or willing to voice them, and now it's like, no, I know something here, and I trust my intuition more, which allowed you to be, I think, more effective as a leader. Also, just interesting to reflect on. So 2021, you get an MVP into the calf.
Yep.
And I remember a product meeting we're having, and we're in there, but this product is absolute shit. And you're frustrated. One of my analysts can figure out a way to get the tool to do what it needs to,
Yeah.
but that doesn't make it a product that actually can function on its own yet. And so you're still bridging this gap for a number of years of needing essentially your own professional services team with this sort of product that you're creating. Walk me through those years, that 2021 year, and sort of in growing with the calf.
So I mean, I don't think any product team ever releases something that they are proud of the first time, or like anytime, it's always a compromise. And I think, you know, the joke, like it works on my machine is so persistent in the industry because like, you know, the engineering team's job is to build the minimum amount of stuff they possibly can with the time you've allotted them. And product's job is to go like, no, this is like the minimum standard I'm going to hold you to. And those organizations should always be in some level of conflict or tension over that. But the sort of transition we made, we had a bunch of, you know, failed product starts effectively with different product leaders. The product journey was we basically built a search interface and a task tracker integration so that you could search against like you could task someone with something, search against the data repository. That's what got deployed very, very quickly and was very effective, but it tells you, you know, sort of how simplistic
I mean,
the tools available
that,
were.
that's so interesting, right? Like there's part of your David strategy. It's like you built a 2 feature
Yeah.
product: search
And like
and task.
nothing new or novel about either of those.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
don't misinterpret what I
Right? Like there's no crazy innovation. You
Yep.
you got yourself in through a Trojan horse,
Yeah.
and then you said, "We're gonna build you guys a software that's gonna allow you to search all this stuff that my team is
Yep.
having to search for you already, and then we're just gonna help you
Yep.
track tasks so that they're not tracked on an Excel sheet."
Yep. That's it.
It's so basic. You know, it's one of, I mean, Clay Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma. He goes, you know, the innovator builds a shittier product for a smaller market. I think in 2021, you were still searching for other customers to
Yeah.
deploy to, but there is a moment where you go, you know what? Forget any other customer.
Yeah.
One customer in this case, and a very simple product that can just
Yeah.
get us in there. How did that feel?
Felt liberating to be honest. It was, you know, I can't remember exactly when we made that decision. It's a few years ago now. When we made it, I think it created an advantage as well where every other sort of competitor that was, you know, long established, they sell to a huge variety of different governments. They work on, you know, a huge variety of different use cases. And our sort of like, no, we're fixated on this single customer and we're going to make sure that they are super friggin' happy with whatever we do. It let us go and, you know, back to that sort of like professional services mindset to an extent and bolt on with them and say, we are going to make sure we deliver mission success at whatever cost to like the company. And, you know, we continue to promote that mentality internally is like, we're there to make sure that they have mission success, not to, you know, win another contract. Like those things come. We trust that they come now. This is like, we make you successful. We do the things you need us to do. And, you know, even some of the things that you may not know you need us to do yet. And, you know, we trust that the rest will come. And I think that's enabled us, that focus on like relentless focus on our main customer and like, you know, outsized impact and delivery has been a real differentiator from some of the like legacy defense primes that, you know, we would be competing against.
Yeah. And you again, I think your strategy early on was we didn't even know the competitors. So,
Yeah.
you know, like we sort of walk in and realize we just want to solve this problem really well. But then you start to get to know the competitors a little bit. You start to see where they're winning contracts. There starts to become the Goliath starts to become very apparent and the space that they hold. And I think as you just noted, they're sort of doing everything for everyone in this space. They're these massive software conglomerates.
Yeah.
And you go, you know, here's David's slingshot moment, right? Like you go, here's one client, very narrow, but there's also this attitude of I think you said like this mission critical. We're gonna make sure this rep because they're also not paying enough for your growth just yet.
And I think the, you know, you've characterized it in a negative light, and I think it's actually been, you know, in hindsight, a positive for us.
Mm,
So
mm.
by having to operate lean, by having to, you know, figure out what we can do with the minimum amount of resources, it's actually sort of converted into like an unofficial design philosophy of ours, which is like, well, we can't just build every feature. So like, what is the most impactful feature right now that, you know, moves the ball 5 yards further down the field? And I think that what it means is also like if you add a feature, sometimes we also have to take a feature out that isn't getting the use or traction we want, because we still can't afford to maintain an ever-growing sort of topology of features in the application. And so is it frustrating that sometimes we have to say, like, we can't do that right now? Like, yeah, I'd love to have infinite money and just, do whatever the hell I wanted.
Isn't that when we make our most mistakes, right?
Yeah. It's, watching companies now that are raising money on like the hype that has suddenly entered the defense market. I think it's going to be a real burden for those companies in the future. They don't understand the customer. They don't have, direct feedback and access. And even if they get that, they're going to have spent so much money and created so much, outsized expectation from their investors that it's going to be like a real boat anchor around their neck where they have to charge more and more money and deliver less and less.
Yeah.
And so I think there's, not to mention that, like, in my view, venture doesn't lend itself to the defense market. You are making a bet in a market you don't understand. It takes 5 years to actually enter the market, to get your clearances, to be able to hold your own clearances, to be able to enter the facilities, to talk to the people whose problem you think you know how to solve, only to learn that, like, they don't want that problem solved. Absent that access, I think it's a really, really risky bet that a lot of people are taking right now.
No, you're right. I think the leanness here is the sort of superpower. It is the advantage that you have because you can now work at a speed and an ability to be focused more than ever.
It is unequivocally luck that put us here. And I think the only thing that allowed us to be in a position when we got lucky to like actually run through it is survival. Like, that we've been here for long enough that, like, I think this sort of like lesson that I've taken away from this is, like, by surviving and persevering through this, you put yourself in a position to get lucky. It's like it feels like there's often this sort of, mythology that's created around companies that are successful where it's like, no, it's like they're just, a brilliant individual. Like, I'm not a brilliant individual. I'm lucky that this is a moment in time that I'm hopefully going to get to be a part of. But, like, the trade-off there is, like, the way we got there is really fucking boring.
Yeah.
Grinding it out for years and years, but we put ourselves in a position with more at bats, the famous Michael Scott quote, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." Wayne Gretzky. But, like, that is the fundamental challenge, right? Is like you got to have the at bats. If you're not getting at bats, you can't get hits. Like, it's pretty fucking simple.
So, what are some of the key strategic heuristics that you now hold on to as knowing that you're this David going up this next kind of, one of the heuristics we're talking about is survival. Like, survive long enough to get lucky. I think that's that. Like, I'm gonna survive long enough so you can get lucky is an interesting one for me. So that one seems fitting. What are some of the other ones that you go, here's some strategic heuristics that we run by now?
This is sort of the challenge we have, is like we've been so survival focused for so long that it's like I don't think we know when it's time to make a bet.
That's interesting.
Like, it's the challenge.
So which is interesting. So then you're characterizing the majority of your actions to be they weren't bets. They were known. You were
as close to known as, like,
as close
as humanly possible.
Yeah.
We are getting to as close to certainty as we can before we
make a decision.
Make a decision.
So you're at like 90% certainty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So what does 80% certainty look like, right? Is maybe the piece that you're toggling with.
Yeah. I mean, the other one that I keep thinking about while we're sitting here is like, for a while, Bennett and I mean, since we've been working together, we've joked about, like, oh, that's a champagne problem. And like a champagne problem being like, oh, that's a problem once you've made it and you get to pop the cork. And like, the reality that we've confronted is, like, there's always more champagne problems. Like, you're always having to solve the next problem, and, like, the problems are different and the barriers are different, but, like, I'm not sure any business ever suddenly just, like, goes like, all right, we're done. We've done it. Like,
got no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
game over.
And if they do, they end up the Goliaths of the industry where
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
sitting on their laurels and
There's enough
they're
hubris
taking
there
in
that
yeah, too much hubris. They're taking in their profits, and eventually someone comes in and let me flip it then. What do you think your Goliaths, the big competitors in your industry, are blind to right now? That you go,
yeah.
this is where I think they're blind to and not seeing, and that's going to be maybe their demise or what allows you to compete.
Yeah, so I think a lot of our Goliaths in the industry are American, and watching the sort of like general reputation of America tank has been sad for me. Like I won't lie, like
It's very
it's not a
scary
it's a very
moment in Western society. Yeah, yeah.
it's been sad, but I think that the thing that a lot of them are blind to is that, the rest of the world has taken notice that America is not as trustworthy a partner as they once were, that they will, step over your corpse to make a buck at some point. And I think that is starting to materialize in places where, they would have traditionally been the easy incumbent. And so it's opening doors for us in places where, 2 years ago, it would not have been, even an open conversation. So I think that's one place and I'm not sure they're blind to it. I'm just not sure what they can do.
Correct.
I think the other piece that they're blind to is that not everyone spends at the rate that no one spends at the rate that the American government spends on defense. And the way they price and compete in most markets is incredibly punitive to the people who are actually paying taxes and working in those markets. And so I think that people are much more sensitive today to like localized sovereign industrial benefit as opposed to what they were maybe 2 years ago. And I think that when big American companies come in, they now just tell you how they think you should operate versus being a collaborative partner. So I find my experience has been that is increasingly off-putting, especially as we are seeing, the geopolitical tension and frustration mount around the world. And so again, I'm not sure they're blind to it. I think there is just this, brash American behavior that is now starting to rub people the wrong way.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, and it's not necessarily something they have done, right? Like it's what's interesting is like the landscape is changing underneath them, right? It's not their misstep, but it's a political misstep or, decision that has led to this.
I mean, they're making money hand over fist out of the Department of War in the United States. So like they do play a role in all of
They
this. They've placed people in the current government
they lobby, I'm
to
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
not in Canada. They've placed them in the US government to exert influence. So they have played a role.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, has it been economically beneficial? Like, yes, absolutely. Look at many of them are publicly traded. You can see it,
Yeah.
but it's at the expense of the rest of the world.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. And that's, when Goliath gets a little too greedy, lining their pockets, right? And not and because the other insight, I asked you earlier, what are some of the heuristics? You sort of said it earlier, which was orient to the mission, like you were gonna help the client achieve their goal.
Yeah.
And it's not a checkbox of like, well, we deployed software,
Yep.
you have it, like it's your users not using it or not making it. No, we're gonna make sure we get you all the way to accomplishing your objective.
Mhm.
I think that's beautiful because you've blended this professional services mindset with software. And I think in a way, I don't know, like I'll go off on a limb here, but do you think that's the evolution of certain software? Because like you see the big software enterprise like Salesforce. You can't implement Salesforce without a huge implementation, so professional services to the point where Salesforce has lost a ton of customers to simpler products that don't take so much work to configure, right? So this sort of large enterprise then needing implementation team was this play, but it's like what if we simplified the software, still gave you an implementation team, but was focused less on just the software, but actually helping you achieve your goals?
Yeah, so I think the sort of software as a service model that exists in relatively simple applications does not exist when you're talking about like the accompanying organizational transformation and like process transformation that needs to accompany, deeply complex, you know,
Yeah.
policy, regulatory oversight. Like there are so many more barriers, hoops, challenges that the average customer in defense has to jump over than there is in like installing an app on your iPhone.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, you can leave that up to the customer on an iPhone app to adopt.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about deploying something that is like in a sensitive environment, handling sensitive information, dealing with things that people are sensitive about, I think that the adoption burden, the adoption hurdles, the tyranny of the status quo in those environments is way higher. And if organizations aren't deliberate about that transformation, and it requires bolting on external experts to help them make that leap, I think if you're not doing that as an organization,
Yeah.
you're kind of setting yourself up to fail. You're creating that like the field of dreams. It's like if I build it, they will come.
Yeah. Yeah.
And repeatedly that.
So now you sell them change management.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't like those words, but like yes.
What are the type of leaders you've needed around you? And you've had to change some of the leaders. You've had to
Sure.
change quite a few over the years, but there are some that have done well and lasted. What kind of leadership team have you had to establish in order to survive this long and not pull your hair out?
Yep.
And
Well, I have pulled my hair out. So when we're talking about leadership team, I think, there's a book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, Ben Horowitz, and in it he talks about how, the team from 1 to 10 is not the team from 10 to 100, is not the team from 100 to 1,000. And I think one of the best reflections in that book is he says something like, and like, make no mistake when you're reading this book, like I'm talking about you as well. And so like I'm conscious of the fact that like at some point maybe the company outgrows me. But when you're early days, you need people who can do a lot of different things. You don't need a ton of specialists. You need generalists who don't have a ton of depth but have a lot of breadth. And maybe one or two specialists that are effective at the sort of thing you're focused on. As we've sort of matured through this journey, we've now started to recognize when we need a specialist for a particular role, and we've done a much better job of defining that in advance and bringing that on. But I think that, still fundamentally what we need is like people who are independent. I don't like micromanaging. I don't like hovering over people's shoulders or telling them what to do. I would much rather they go out, make a mistake, come back, go like, here's the mistake I made. What can we do to fix it? So, I don't want to micromanage people. I think the other main piece that I've learned, and in fairness, I was told this like 25 years ago on one of my like first jobs. I was working construction up north. I was helping like build custom homes, a big
that's
cottage.
cool. I didn't know you were doing that.
Yeah. And
What was you? Were you carpenter? What were you?
I showed up and I was like, dude, I'll carry tiles. I just want to learn. Managed to last past the first week and then worked 2 full summers there. It was great, but I was working on this guy's like massive. It was like a 20,000 square foot cottage, like unbelievably huge.
Cottage. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was the former like COO of Mobile One, something like that. He'd drive up from Arizona every summer, stay in the Muskoka, and then drive home, as soon as it started to get a little bit cold. And I remember like when he found out that I was just like doing like this as a summer job, he was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" Asked me a bunch of questions. And the advice he gave me was like, "Sam, like whatever else you do the rest of your life, make sure you're a good communicator." And like I kind of like, yeah, sure, I'm gonna be an engineer. Like I'm gonna build shit. Like fuck you, you don't know what you're talking about. And like sure enough, the thing that pisses me off the most is when people can't effectively communicate, when they cannot tell me what they want, need, when it's like I have to spend energy to get the thing out of them that they're trying to tell me, drives me fucking bananas.
Yeah.
And I think that the lesson I learned retroactively is like, should have listened to him a long time ago. Like when smart people, when smart people tell you things, don't dismiss it outright. But I think that, what I'm starting to value more and more amongst the team that we've got is like their ability to communicate. So being able to say, this is the problem, these are the potential solutions I've identified, breaking problems down, communicating them clearly. that makes my life easier.
Yeah.
I get it's not all about my life being easier, but like this is a place where like if you need me to expend effort on your behalf, telling me why I'm expending the effort and what you need me to expend it on,
Yeah.
so much better than having to figure it out after a 2-hour discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't sit in another fucking meeting with no purpose.
And so how do you encourage communication? How do you make better communication part of the culture as a team, both executive team, full team? Like you've made some strides on the team overall team culture, right? Like,
Yeah.
early on after the pandemic, you said, "Yeah, we're coming back to the office. Like I want people in, I want people chatting, I want people engaged." So how have you built, some practices around communication? Is there anything that you're like, what, this is work to create a better flow?
Yeah, I think, we still operate hybrid. We still have some fully remote employees, but I think the observation we made early on in the pandemic was like no one was properly equipped to function well in the pandemic. Stuff immediately reverted to the like lowest cognitive threshold possible, which is text. And so like you'd get a Slack message and then you read it in whatever fucking tone you wanted. You'd work yourself up, you'd respond. And so, for me personally, I like one-on-one interpersonal engagement. But like one-on-one, that's a happy place for me. And so I think, encouraging people to come back to the office, incentivizing it. What we've observed is the people who come back to the office and like engage, the things that are important to me, communication skills, you know, team development, collaboration, they've dramatically exceeded the people who are fully remote. It's not an indictment of remote work. I'm sure we could do a much better job of like better integrating fully remote and fully in the office. But the camaraderie that gets developed by being in the same place as other people every day, it's hard to replicate that. We fly people in now. We do things to bring everyone together because
Yeah.
we recognize the value of it, but it's almost impossible to replicate.
Mhm.
And so I think, from an executive standpoint, I could not imagine having a fully remote executive. That just doesn't make sense to
Okay.
me right now.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point in the future it would, but it doesn't make sense. And I think the challenge is like at the executive level, the friction is the highest. It's
Mm.
like you have to be capable of fighting, but fighting fairly. Do I expect you to be in the office every day? Like, fuck no. Work from home, do what you need to do. But like when we are going to have hard discussions, we are going to make time for each other and be in the same fucking place to
Yeah.
have it. So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you're hitting on that because you know me and you know my work and how much I love the importance of productive conflict and just debate. So, like, what is your reflection on the value of productive conflict on this massive journey that you've had of building Anvil? Are there moments where you think back? Yeah, you used to smile, so I'm,
yeah.
I'm thinking,
Yeah, I mean, you sort of started this off where like you're a contrarian, so you're wrong a lot, and it's like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'm wrong a lot. But I think that the people around me who have like sat there and forced me to like reason or think better, that's been the single biggest enabler to becoming more effective. When I first started my clerkship, I clerked for a judge, big scary man, lovely. Like I think the world of him. So don't misinterpret that statement, but like very intimidating. And I remember one of the first times I walked into his office with my first like bench memo, which is like you write up like you get a case, you're told effectively like tell me what I need to know about it and tell me what you think the decision should be. And I passed it over to him and he sat there and read it for like 10, 15 minutes, end to end, probably multiple times. And then he looked up and he just started hammering me with questions on what I'd said. And I'm sitting there in a suit, like 2 weeks in, like, yes, and terrified. But like he forced me to get better at the like
Mm.
logical reasoning component of it by having an argument with me. Not an unfair or an angry argument, by having that verbal combat. And what I've like come to appreciate is like if people can show up and have that like verbal combat, we all start to think better about the problem. And so
I like that.
yeah.
I actually really like that. It is through debate and it's through verbal combat that our ideas get better. I obviously teasing you a little about being wrong contrarian because it's when the contrarian is right that they're outsized right. That's the whole
Yeah.
yeah. And so what I've enjoyed seeing or participating in with your team is when we've had these strategic discussions and we've got everyone in the room and we are debating ideas and challenging with sticky notes up on the board and having these moments. I feel like there's real magic and there's real value in it. And it gets tense, you know?
Should.
It should, it
Yeah.
should. What have been some moments that you reflect on where some of the you feel like good decisions came out of, like, good debate and conflicts? Is there any moment that comes out where you're like, "You know what? We had a big conflict, we had a big debate over this, and it was only through the tension that we got to a place that was better." Do you have a specific example? Yeah.
I remember one of those retreats, there was a moment where Brad turned to me and said, "So we're just building Tableau or like Power BI or something." And I remember like just rage building inside of me. But he wasn't wrong. Like there was truth to what he was saying. It just wasn't, I wasn't expressing myself well enough. And so what he was seeing was like, we're just building like a visualization tool. And that is not what we build. But I think that it was a moment where like we'd been arguing for a while at that retreat about like, what specifically is the value add that we are adding. And Brad had heard we are building visualization layers on top of the information. And I think that was a very productive like argument at the end of the day. But like the moment where Brad is like, "So we're just building Tableau," and I was like, "God."
Because it also makes you realize what the other person.
Yeah, yeah.
It makes you realize the gaps in your communication.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, okay, so all I've been able to communicate
Yeah.
is to get you to this point. Like, I'm doing something wrong.
5 years later, we still haven't built Tableau.
We have a visualization to it's because there was a map. At one point, there was a map and there was data
Still is a
points.
map.
There still is a map.
Still
Okay,
is.
I wasn't sure because we went from search and task management.
Yeah.
Where are we now? Search, task,
Search task, map,
map.
annotation services, yeah, some data pipelines.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, there we go. It's expanding. It's
Yeah.
yeah. That's
Scope creep.
scope creep. What have you changed about your conflict style or the way you approach conflict over the years as a leader? Because we know it's important. We know it's good.
Yeah, I think probably what's changed the most for me is I've seen it with some other people where the fun for them is the argument as opposed to like why we are having this argument. And so make no mistake, I still enjoy a good debate. One of the things that you've actually helped me recognize is like when it's important, when you're wearing a CEO hat, like what you say ultimately does go. Like there is no debate at the end of it if you just like say, "Yeah, well fuck you, I don't believe you, I'm doing my way." And so you either go in with the intention of like actually getting feedback,
Yeah.
or you just tell them what you want to do, but there's no middle ground there.
Yeah.
You gotta like pick a fucking lane and live with it. And so I think that for me, probably the most important one over time has been like knowing when I'm making a decision and I'm not willing to listen to other people versus when I want feedback and I want to be challenged and I want to have that discussion and being clearer about which lane I'm in, because straddling it is like the most dangerous place.
Now you've had some interesting dysfunctional team members over the years. There's the brilliant, difficult to work with because they're sort of kind of on their own, but then there's the brilliant, difficult to work with an asshole. I'm gonna add that like kind of egotistical piece. Or anyways, you've had some difficult and not naturally a place. How have you dealt with them in the past? Have you lessons learned around dealing with?
I think a lot of those people in my past, I think the lesson that I continue to learn is like when you get that first sort of like red flag, there's probably not too much more rope you want to give that person before you make the decision to like move on without them. It's a constant failing on my part to not like end that soon enough. And the harm that like you are not aware is being caused elsewhere in the team is almost inevitably more significant than you're giving it credit for. And so I think the biggest challenge I've always had is like the second bad behavior starts to materialize. Number one, like correct it. If they don't accept the correction, that's pretty much the end of the relationship.
Yeah.
I've never successfully lived by those words is the reflection. And so the lesson that I expect I will continue to learn is like, got to make the correction, got to make the decision sooner, faster.
Yeah. Because it becomes harder and harder to make the correction.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's like you start to try to find like weird patterns to escape the situation instead of recognizing like, no, I have full autonomy to end this right now.
And I think you will. I think that's part of when I'm talking about the growth in a lot of leaders is the growth in the conviction of your intuition. Because before we would doubt ourselves more and more and more. Like, am I the crazy one? Maybe it's just me. I'm not getting along with them. But as your leadership grows, as your confidence grows, you go, no, I've seen this pattern before. I'm aware of it. I'm not going to feel good about it. But that conviction in your own intuition is key. So we've talked about some of the strategies. I like this focus on conflict and kind of the importance of it. Like I think about the different debate like points where you have to assemble your team to go, okay, we're not loving divorces here. Like there is no love in divorce.
Yeah.
That's the name of that chapter. There's no love in divorce. So there's a debate that the team has to have around where we want to go next. And then you pick up, a bunch of professional services contracts. And then there's a debate, a point where it's like, hey, we can't just be professional services for everyone. Who are we going to be? And it's sort of this debate over choosing defense. And then there's this debate and conflict around burning the boats and go, okay, we can't be professional services for all these different things. How do we and there are these pivotal moments where you had to allow for really good debate and conviction to show up and create. So I like that, and I think it's a good theme for us. So we've covered strategy, we've covered some things about the team, we've covered some things about your leadership. What's next? What are you excited about here? What's the future of Anvil? What should we be looking out for?
Yeah, I think at the moment we're sort of grappling with the next set of champagne problems, which is we're growing faster than we ever have. And so like over the last week, we've basically added 10 new people. We're doing like onboarding and training in groups now, which is like not something we've ever had to grapple with for efficiency. Yeah, Brad's in on weekends building desks because it feels like an operations problem. Like
Poor Brad. Everything feels like an
when he told me he
operations
was doing
problem.
that, I was like, dude, I'm buying pizza for everyone to build these desks. Like, let's just, yeah. So I think you know, there's there's a whole new set of growing pains and things that I don't know that are going to be the next chapter of this. But yeah, I think it's an exciting time to be in the defense industry for sure. How that materializes is still like, we're focused on survival, not letting our head get too far in front of our skis. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Comes back to survival. Survive and let's ride this new wave and see where the wave takes us.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Sam, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story and your insights and the journey. I think it's been a pretty cool journey to be a part of, a pretty cool journey to watch, and a journey that I'm excited to write about and tell stories about. So thank you for sharing with us.
Thanks, man.